Our workplace environment has changed, our economy has changed. We are going from manufacturing to an oriented service economy. And in doing that, there are regulatory concerns regarding importing and exporting activities. One of the primary tasks that you have is to properly classify the goods for importing and exporting. To classify those goods, you need to know what those goods are. So you must create a database or a spreadsheet of the type of merchandise that you are involved with. For instance, it may be machinery and their parts, or textile and wearing apparel, footwear, household articles such as ceramic ware, dinnerware, that type of thing. You must know where your primary activities fall. So one way to do that is to go through that activity and put those items into a spreadsheet or a database and sort by the dollar volume. That way you know where your primary activities lie. Now, how can you know something about your merchandise? You need to acquire materials that support information on the type of merchandise that you're importing. For instance, this book, Know Your Merchandise, is an excellent book, and it provides information on different types of merchandise. It covers automobile tires, gloves, with detailed information, footwear. For instance, let's look at dinnerware. We're dealing with ceramics. Ceramics can be bone china or they can be earthenware. And what is the difference between those two categories? There is a difference in the rate of duty. And customs would be looking both on importing and exporting and the country that you're sending things to have the proper classification on the merchandise. The background on that type of merchandise is found in this book, as well as other materials, research materials, reference materials. You may have fasteners. You might go to a trade book such as a catalog. Granger's is a good example. Dealing with just the fasteners, socket head cap screws, other type screws and fasteners are covered in this book so that you know what customs is looking for in the different classifications. So with that background information on your merchandise, you must apply the tariff to that description of merchandise. What that means is you're assigning a tariff number to the product, and that is required upon importation and exportation. You need to know the general rules of interpretation. Those are the rules that govern the classification of merchandise both coming into the country and being exported from the country, and the documents that have to be filed with the regulatory agencies. You also need further information, and that is precedential rulings that have been issued by Customs and perhaps the Bureau of Industry and Security or the former Bureau of Export Administration for exports. I would recommend that you go to the Customs website, which is also known as Customs Border Protection at this time, and go to their website and do a search on your merchandise. They have an online search system, and you can type in the type of merchandise, a set screw, or chinaware, bone chinaware, or footwear with specific information, and find precedential rulings that have been issued on your merchandise. And that will give you direction and support for the actions that you take on your import and your export documentation. Are you aware that Customs requires 95% accuracy on your import entries for classification purposes? It is important to do this activity properly. Again, I recommend that you come up with a handle on the type of merchandise that you are dealing with and rank that by a spreadsheet, by dollar value, and knock off the highest value items with the classification process, applying the general rules of interpretation, and also doing research on the Customs website and obtain the presidential ruling that has been issued for that merchandise. For instance, you may have machine tools as your primary activity, and that, let's suggest that it's classified at 8457 in the tariff, and with the highest ranking value associated with your activity there. So if you classify those machine tools properly, then you are obtaining a high rate of accuracy on your imports. For instance, if the machine tools represent 80% of your activity and you have those classified correctly, then you've reached 80% accuracy, so to speak, and you're reaching towards 95% accuracy overall. Then you come down, and usually in this type of business, on an average economic level, 20% of activity is going to fall in replacement parts for those machine tools. So then you would start working towards the classification of those parts. For instance, you may have electric motors and electric wires following in decreasing values, and so you would want to classify those motors and the electric wire, electrical switches in a descending order and get the proper classification, and thus moving up in the percentage of accuracy of your activities. The complexity of the classification process is such that you need to know the nomenclature of the harmonized tariff system. One of the requirements is that you have a harmonized tariff book, and it runs in the neighborhood of $100 for that book, and it can be procured from the government printing office. When you obtain that book, you're going to find it is a very thick volume of material. It is organized by a table of contents, and following the table of contents you have the general rules of interpretation. There are 6 of those rules on the international level, and there is an additional U.S. note, making 7 rules that you need to use to or will employ in the classification of your products, both for import and for export. Following the general rules of interpretation, there are the general notes. The beginning of the tariff book, some 35 years ago, had probably 10 pages covering those notes. That has expanded, and in the last 10 years, extensively with the free trade agreements, and that 10 pages has grown to 485 pages in the very beginning of the tariff book before you ever get to the tariff classifications. So those general notes are very extensive now. Most of your free trade agreements are dealt with under those general notes, such as Chile, Singapore, those free trade agreements. As they grow, additional sections in the general notes will be added, and you will have to be familiar with them.